Hi, welcome to session 9, Playing with Chocolate. My name is Lon Lamb, and today I'm going to be your kitchen instructor. So I thought we'd start with a quick story about how they make chocolate, and I got a little bit of help from my niece to do this. Now, cacao trees are an evergreen, and they're grown across the tropics. And they look a little bit like this. Now they produce these football-shaped pods that yellow as they ripen, and when they are fully ripe, they're harvested, often by hand. After harvest, they are cut open, and inside you find a lot of white, fleshy seeds. I'm told those seeds taste a little bit lemony, and someday maybe I'll get to try them. After they're split open, they are scraped, and those seeds end up in wooden bins and they're left to ferment. Now during fermentation, that fleshy bit, it kind of liquefies and melts away, a little grist, I know. And what's left behind is kind of a bitter bean. Those beans are emptied out onto mats, and there they're left to dry. Now they have to be turned occasionally to make sure that they don't molder. And these two steps, fermentation and drying, are where a lot of the flavor development happens for chocolate. So after this, they get packed up and they're taken to a factory. At the factory, they are cleaned, roasted, and winnowed. Winnowing is where they remove the brittle outer shell. And what's left behind are cocoa nibs. Now, they take the cocoa nibs and they grind them up. And no, they don't grind them by hand in colorful mortar and pestles. Apparently chocolate factories are gray and boring to draw, and so she took some liberties. But anyway, so you grind up the cocoa nibs, and what you get is this paste, and it's called the chocolate liqueur or the cocoa mass. It's got a lot of names, but whatever it's called, that's 100% chocolate. They can take that and process it, or they can press it. And when they press it, this yellow fluid comes out, and that's the cocoa butter. And what's left behind is a brown disc, and those are the cocoa solids. Now they can take the cocoa solids and grind that, and that's where we get cocoa powder. Okay, so enough of Audrey's drawings. Let's go have a look at this stuff in real life. I have right here the cocoa nibs I was talking about. They're quite small, nice and crunchy, and they add a nice pop of flavor and some texture to whatever you sprinkle them on. Keep an eye out for them. Next up, I've got some cocoa powder, and this is the natural cocoa powder. It's what you get when you grind that disc of cocoa solids. Again, great flavor. Some people find it a little sharp, a little too much edge to it, and that's probably because it's quite acidic. Now, back in the 19th century, they figured out that they could temper that acidity by treating it with an alkalizing agent that raises its pH, it mellows the flavor, and it kind of darkens the color. So, cocoa powder. Next up are kind of, I think of these as like the baking chocolates. They span the two ends of the cocoa product spectrum. This is an unsweetened bar of chocolate. It's 100% cocoa. This is 0% cocoa. It's white chocolate. It's actually just cocoa butter that's been sweetened, and there's some dairy added as well. So great for cooking and baking with, not so great for eating. So next up are the ones we want to eat, or at least I want to eat. I've got a bar of 90% cacao here. This is a dark chocolate. I've got another bar of, this is a 60% semi-sweet. And last up, I've got a chunk of a 54% bittersweet. Now here's the thing. Those terms, dark, bittersweet, and semi-sweet, they're kind of meaningless because they're unregulated. Producers can call their chocolates whatever they want. All they're really telling you is there's no milk in here. The numbers, though, the numbers are important because they tell you how much chocolate is in here, and whatever isn't chocolate, most of that is sugar. So you can look at those numbers and get an idea of how sweet these bars are. Now, sugar isn't the only thing they can add to chocolate. The other thing that they add to chocolate is milk, and that's how you make milk chocolate. And I can already see some of you are kind of turning your noses up to milk chocolate, but keep an eye out. There's some really great small producers out there that add just a small amount of milk, small amount of sugar, and so you end up with a milk chocolate with a cacao percentage that's in the 70s and 80s, and they're fantastic. That kind of judicious addition of milk and sugar really brings out some of the nuances in chocolate flavor. The other really cool thing about chocolate is it's not just its flavor, it's the texture and it's the appearance. Now, if you look at these bars, they're all shiny and they've got that great snap, right? Now that texture and that appearance, that comes from the way the manufacturers cool this stuff when they're making the bars. They're not just cooled haphazardly, they're cooled in a very controlled way. And what happens when they do that is the cocoa butter molecules, instead of linking up in kind of a haphazard, random fashion, they link up in these long, neat chains, and they're just end on end stuck to each other. And when you have a lot of that, you get that great sheen and that great snap. So that cooling process, that's called tempering. And I remember learning how to temper chocolate. It's a mess. You kind of pour chocolate onto a slab of marble and you move it around to cool it evenly. And to figure out when you're done cooling and you can start using that chocolate to, you know, make whatever fancy decorations you're making, you dip your pinky into the chocolate and then you dab it right here on your bottom lip. And what they say is when the chocolate is body temperature, you're good to go. It's not totally true. It's a little bit more subtle than that. You kind of have to look at it and see how it moves, but whatever, it's so messy. It seems a little unhygienic. And I remember trying it like twice and thinking there's no way can I just use a thermometer, please? So it turns out you can temper chocolate at home without making the mess, without buying a marble slab, and you don't need a thermometer, but you do need to work carefully. And here's how we do it. So here's how you temper chocolate at home. I'm going to take my chocolate and I'm going to take about 20% of it, 25% of it, set that aside. The rest of this chocolate, I'm going to chop into pieces, stick in the microwave and melt very gently. I'm going to stir a lot to make sure it's just warm through and just fluid. I like to use a serrated knife for this. It's nice and long, and the serrations kind of grab the chocolate and keep it from bouncing all over the place. So these guys are going in the microwave. While that chocolate's melting, I'm going to take the rest of this, and I'm also going to chop it, but I'm going to set it aside. Now, I'm being really careful here to chop these bits of chocolate really finely. Great. This looks pretty close. I've got a couple little pieces left, but mostly melted, and the bowl is barely warm, which is a great sign. So here's our plan. I'm going to empty these guys in here. All right, so let's give this a stir. Now, what's happening as I stir is that the cocoa butter and the melted chocolate, it's just kind of floating around in here, kind of doing its thing. And what we want it to do is to link up into crystals and beta crystals. It has a couple options. And to get it to do that, we want to stir so that it comes into contact with the chunks of chocolate. And that's because the cocoa butter and the chunks of chocolate, it's already in formation. It's perfectly aligned in those nice, snappy, shiny crystals. And we want the free-floating cocoa butter to just find a crystal and link up on the end. You can see that most of those chunks have melted away. There's like a couple large pieces left. So I'm just going to keep stirring. I might pop this in the microwave for another 3-5 seconds just to kind of help them out, but we should be pretty close. This looks great. So this is my tempered chocolate. I've got another bowl here of just straight up melted chocolate. And I'm going to show you the difference between these two. I've got 2 little pieces of parchment here. And I'm just going to smear a little bit of chocolate onto each one. Kind of a nice thin layer. Okay, so the deal with tempered chocolate is if you've done it properly, it'll actually start to harden up pretty soon after, because those cocoa butter molecules aren't floating around anymore. They found their crystals and got into place. They're in formation now. I have some chocolate that I tempered earlier, and you can see that this piece is nice and shiny, and it's not melting when I hold it. It's not ending up on my fingers, which is great. I have another piece of melted chocolate here. As you can see, it's got these blooms, these white blotches and blobs that look, I don't know, some people say it looks like mold. That's fine. It's fine to eat. It's just ugly. That's the cocoa butter. It didn't get into line, didn't form those nice crystals, and it just kind of floats to the top. The other thing is, I don't know if you can see this, but it's already starting to melt as I hold it. And it's kind of bendy as opposed to brittle. It kind of disintegrates in your hand. So let's have a look at the two blobs of chocolate I've got going here. You can see the tempered chocolate. It's pretty solid. In another minute or two, I should be able to peel it off of this piece of parchment. And it's actually so sturdy that it's holding the parchment pretty flat. My melted chocolate, however, is still really wet. And I melted this a while ago. This parchment is still really curled because there's no structure to it. And this guy's probably going to take, let's call it an hour or so to harden up. And once it does, those blooms are going to start to become apparent. So one more time, this is our tempered chocolate, nice and stiff and looking glossy. And our melted chocolate is kind of a melty mess. And that is why tempering is really important. So I can already hear some of you saying that that's too much work and you don't want to bother, and that's fine. I don't think you have to temper chocolate for everything. One other option you could do is to make chocolate curls, and they're really easy. All you need is some chocolate, peeler, and a sheet of plastic wrap. You're going to take your bar of chocolate, kind of wrap the end in plastic, and we're just going to rub it against our palm. And I'm looking to just very slightly melt the chocolate at the edge. This should only take maybe 5-10 seconds. I'm gonna grab my peeler, hold it at an angle, and just kind of peel off a spiral of chocolate. Now, as you keep doing this, the spirals are gonna get wider, which is nice. And every couple of shavings, you're gonna have to come back and rewarm that edge. Like once you get through all the warm chocolate, just come back, give it another quick rub, peel, and shave. So if you want larger spirals, get a bigger chunk of chocolate, wrap it up in the same way. We're going to warm up that edge. Now, since this is a bigger piece, it's going to take a little bit more time. You just have to be patient with it and keep working that edge until you've got a nice, evenly warmed, slightly melted face. Take the peeler across. one more time. So here's that face. Some lovely chocolate curls. So we've learned how they make chocolate, what to look for when shopping for chocolate, and a couple tricks for doing up our desserts. Now, I hope you go out there and try to make some curls, dip some strawberries, try your hand at tempering, or even just throw some melted chocolate on some cookies. Whatever you do, have fun.